I've made no effort in this YouTube project without first asking for the Lord's help. And I did so again tonight before I started this. I'm not trying to expose private matters, but I think I'll just tell you briefly what I've noticed about my prayers. They vary a little bit from time to time, but they have these elements that the Lord will touch my intellect, my tongue, my remembrances, and my delivery of what I do, to the end that I might further His will and increase benefit to my family and friends and anybody that might listen in. That's, in essence, what I pray for. And there's been times when I've started these, and the term I would probably use is scatterbrained. My thoughts sometimes go in 1,000 different directions, it seems like, all at once, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but they don't collect themselves all at once, and I don't have anything written down. It's just what comes to my heart and mind as I talk. Sometimes I get some insights as I think about things through the day, and some of those insights I use, and some of them I don't. I feel to address something that I started to mention in the last video about why I seem to just keep driving this same point home. And I started to say it last time, but I didn't finish, I noticed. So I'll finish it. Maybe the best way that I could get you to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm doing it for the same reason that a person who's a carpenter or a home builder. I'm kind of a home builder myself, not in the sense that you'd think of it, but I hope to be able to build a home that continues through eternity, and a house that stays together and is unified. The Lord's trying to do the same thing. I know if you read the scriptures about the house of Israel and what He's trying to do with that nation, with that people that will let Him prevail in their thinking, as President Nelson says in his definition of that term. Those who would say, let God prevail, are doing the same thing that Jacob did when he was wrestling with the Lord, or the angel of the Lord, at a place called Peniel in the scriptures, when he dreamed of the ladder going into heaven and coming down. And at the end of all that, he had this dream, and his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. And of course, it shows up a lot in the scriptures. He had 12 sons, and I think one daughter, but I won't go into that. But anyway, back to the house building. The reason I keep going after this single concept, up here on the wall behind me, you'll see it, charity. I talk about it a lot, and you might say, well, why? Here's why. For the same reason a home builder would want to shingle the house, put a roof on it, before he started to paint the walls. So in this, what I would consider to be early going, and us trying to understand all this, I'm trying to put a roof on something so that as I add things later, it'll start to make sense more. Put paint on the walls before you get a roof, and you just end up having to do everything over again. So in a way, the roof can be considered like part of the foundation. It needs to be there to protect everything else. And the foundation does that, of course, because it sits on the foundation. A house does. But also a roof keeps other things from dripping in and getting where they shouldn't be and messing up the work you've already done. Now, I don't know if that analogy will click in your mind and help you see why I just keep after this in the beginning here. But you will see it later on if you don't now, at least if you stick with this, if you try. That's the other thing I include in my prayers, is I pray for those who listen. Will listen with the intent to understand and apply. Because if you don't do that, you don't really learn. Desire, do, know, remember, become. How many times have I said that? Well, speaking of how many times have I said it, I'm going to start again tonight and read about opposition, because something else I didn't get to last time has to do with opposition. And I realized that I read this last time, but I need to do it again now because I didn't get to the part that I was really going to use that for. I got sidetracked onto something else. And when I get sidetracked and look back, I think there was a reason I got sidetracked. There was a purpose for that. Kind of like those, like I said before, instead of saying, oh, why me? What am I to learn from this? What am I to learn from the fact that the Lord, maybe through the Spirit, took me a different direction that I figured I needed to go? You see the Lord's hand in things and give him credit. It pays dividends, I found out. So you've noticed in some of the titles that I've used for these uploads, I've, in parentheses, put a capital L, LL, in parentheses. Lehi's lesson, 2 Nephi chapter 2. I put it in the titles so that if you ever need to review that, you can go back and listen to this again maybe and get some idea as to why I would spend so much time trying to talk about opposition. You'll see. Hang in there. Starting with verse 11, 2 Nephi chapter 2. Once again, I'll read it carefully so that it'll sink if it hasn't already. For it must needs be that there is an opposition in all things. If not so, my firstborn in the wilderness, righteousness could not be brought to pass. Neither wickedness, neither holiness, nor misery, neither good nor bad. Wherefore all things must needs be a compound in one. It's just all into one big ball and it's all the same. That's what that means. A compound in one, wherefore if it should be one body, it must needs remain as dead, having no life, neither death, nor corruption, nor incorruption, happiness, nor misery, neither sense, nor insensibility. Wherefore it must needs have been created for a thing of naught, wherefore there could have been no purpose in the end of its creation. Wherefore this thing must needs destroy the wisdom of God and his eternal purposes, and also the power and the mercy and the justice of God. He's explaining some things that are just critically important, and both sides, both ends of the spectrum have to be there to make it happen. And if you shall say there is no law, you shall also say there is no sin. If you say there's no sin, you shall also say there's no righteousness. And if there be no righteousness, there be no happiness. And if there be no happiness, righteousness, nor happiness, and there be no punishment, nor misery, and if these things are not, there is no God. And if there is no God, we are not, neither the earth, for there could have been no creation of things, neither to act nor to be acted upon, wherefore all things must have vanished away. Kind of tells you something, doesn't it? If you read back through that and think about it, that even God, before you get in a situation or have the power to create, had to go through making choices that involved opposition. Gives you some insights. And now, my sons, I speak unto you these things for your profit and learning. For there is a God, and he hath created all things, both the heavens and the earth, and all things that in them are, things that act and things to be acted upon. Have you ever wondered whether or not which one you are? Are you a thing to act or to be acted upon? Do you know people that don't make the choice to act, and therefore they're so heavily influenced by others that they're always acted upon? Are they happy people? If your experience has been like mine, you'd have to say no. People that are always acted upon rather than getting some backbone, facing the wind and acting, making good choices even when they're unpopular, are the ones that get ahead and have happiness. I'm going to back up just a bit and say again, I speak into these things for your profit and learning, for there is a God, and he hath created all things, both the heavens and the earth, and all things that in them are, things that are to act and things to be acted upon. Now I'll continue. And to bring about his eternal purposes in the end of man, after he had created our first parents and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and in fine all things which are created, it must needs be that there was an opposition, even the forbidden fruit, opposite the fruit of the tree of life. Because it goes on to say, even the forbidden fruit in opposition to the tree of life, the one being sweet and the other bitter. You might ask yourself, which is which? There's something to ponder. You might think you know. But maybe after what we've read here, maybe the fruit of opposition could be thought of as sweet because it helps us. It helps us to realize what the other fruit is there for. The fruit of the tree of life, which is, of course, the fruit that we've been talking about. Charity right up here. But it's an interesting read. I'd recommend that you go back through it several times and sit and think about it. Pay attention to individual words and phrases. Cross-reference. Spend some time with it until eventually you get to the point that you realize there really is a need for opposition. It has to be there for us to grow. And according to this, even for us to exist. Wherefore the Lord gave unto man that he should act for himself. Act. Not be acted upon, but act for himself. Wherefore man could not act for himself, save it should be that he was enticed by either the one or the other. Now, isn't that interesting? You're saying, what was that? I was listening to something else, or I was distracted. Tell me again. Well, that's the advantage of these YouTube uploads. Back it up and play it again. Go to the scriptures, 2 Nephi chapter 2, and read it again. That came out of verse 16. Critically important to understand. Okay, now, earlier I had talked about when I was at Bear Lake West, sitting some family members down, having them go through and listen. I put it on TV. I remember this talk called In Praise of Those Who Save by Elder Uchtdorf. In Praise of Those Who Save. It was in April. I should have looked it up. I think it was the spring, but it could have been fall of the April conference. That he gave a talk called In Praise of Those Who Save. And in the last half of that talk, he talks about charity. And if you listen carefully, and now if you've memorized these up here and you know the words, and you look at how he uses them, it opens up all kinds of things. Because he compares charity virtues. I got a list of them right here. Similar to what's up there, but a little different. You notice I've got some writing out to the side. I've got one here, similar to the ones I've been giving away that don't have the writing. That's kind of the blank card version. And I'll use another time to tell you how I've used those through the years. But this talk that he gives talks about the virtues of charity. And then he goes on to say that pride, the virtues, not the virtues, but the elements of pride are in opposition to these 12 virtues of charity. You'll see 13 here, but there's actually only 12, like I said. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth is only one item. And you'll notice the words I have written out there. Actually, not in my handwriting, because I didn't write them. I shouldn't have said that. It's one of my daughters. And then she left it behind. But it's okay. I can use it. So I'm going to go through, and I'm going to list these virtues. And I'm pulling from his talk, Elder Uchtdorf's talk, called In Praise of Those Who Save. The last half of the talk. The first part doesn't have it in. But he talks about the people of Nephi for 200 years after the Savior visited them in the Americas, having a 200-year period of pure happiness and peace. Must have been something like Lehi felt when he tasted the fruit from the tree of life that it says in Revelations 22:2 has 12 manner of fruit. 12. These 12. From Moroni 7:45. Suffereth long. And the pride side of that, short-tempered. Elder Uchtdorf says. Kind. Well, what do you think the opposition to that is? That one's pretty obvious, isn't it? Unkind is the pride side of that. Envieth not is the charity side of that. If you go over to the pride column, envious. Again, that one's pretty obvious. Here's one. Is not puffed up. Is not puffed up. From Elder Uchtdorf's talk, the opposite of that from the pride column would be exaggerates his own strengths and ignores the virtues of others. That would be the satanic influence, the pride. Exaggerate. Have you known people that exaggerate their own strengths and ignore the virtues of others? Or have you done that yourself? Well, if you have, you've been acting off the pride side instead of the charity side, because the charity side says, is not puffed up. Let's go to the next one. Seeketh not her own. Can you guess what that one would be on the pride side of that? Selfish. Now that I say it, it's pretty understandable, isn't it? Seeketh not her own. That means unselfish. And the pride side would be selfish. as explained by President Uchtdorf in that talk, if you look for it carefully. Thinketh no evil. Thinketh no evil is on the charity side, and Elder Uchtdorf on the pride side gives a clue here. He says, so in opposition to thinketh no evil, means the evil's gone, right? Assumes evil intent, he says, where there is none, and hides his own weaknesses under clever excuses, or with clever excuses. I'll say that one again. Thinketh no evil. That's from Moroni 7:45. And then Elder Uchtdorf's assumes evil intent when there is none and hides his own weaknesses under or with clever excuses. You know, people that do that. Assumes evil intent. Tries to gaslight you. Is a term they use quite often now to mean that. Assumes evil intent where there is none and hides their own weaknesses under clever excuses. You don't see what they're doing wrong. Actually, they see it, but they try to hide it. Okay, a good example of opposition for thinketh no evil. Here's a couple. I told you that rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth are really one item. I've got them listed on these cards. It's a separate item, and I shouldn't have done that. The new ones I'm making up are not like that, because that would make 13. And in Moroni 7:45, they're both together, separated only by one comma. So it's one item. And do you know what President Uchtdorf says is the opposite of that in his talk? Cynical. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. And cynical, do you know what cynical means? To give a kind of a false distrust of everything. It's the opposite of rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoicing in truth. And that's to always have some sort of fault-finding mechanism that you come up with when you hear truth. And if you have that, you're said to be cynical, is the word that he uses. Beareth all things. You ever had somebody really get under your skin? Get under your skin, or things just go bad. Maybe the weather even goes bad when you're trying to do something outside or whatever. And you bear it. You grit your teeth, you face the wind, and you get the job done anyway. Okay, beareth all things. You know what President Uchtdorf said is the opposite of that on the pride side of the list? Angry. You become angry. Start cursing God, maybe, because the weather's not right for your project or something else has happened. You become angry rather than bear it and say, I wonder what I can learn from this, rather than, why me? Beareth all things on the charity side and on the opposite side in opposition. President Uchtdorf says, angry. Now here's a couple that he kind of lumps together, and I've got to study a little more to figure out why. Maybe it just didn't get it listed quite like he wanted to. I don't know. It's not quite as straightforward, but he uses the term, for believeth all things, hopeth all things. Now they're on the chart. They're two separate things. Believeth all things, hopeth all things. So this might be one where you can ponder and think and try to come up with your own answers. But in opposition to that, on the pride side of believeth all things and hopeth all things. He puts pessimistic. I have to admit that there are times in my life, and even now I have to be on guard to be pessimistic. Say, oh, that'll never work. There's no sense in trying that. There's no sense in doing this or that. There's no sense in keeping this commandment or that commandment. It's not going to help you any. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's the way some people say. For tomorrow we may die. Why let it bother you? Rather than believeth all things and hopeth all things, they have a pessimistic attitude to those commandments of being charitable from Moroni 7 and 45. Believeth all things, hopeth all things. No, not going to do that. I'm going to be a pessimist on the other side of the scale. Well, and the last one, endureth all things. Endureth all things is what a charitable person would do. Somebody that understands these virtues would think, I'm going to endure all things. What does that mean? Have you ever, well, here's one I can use that's a little bit on the light-minded side, but have you ever gone shopping with your wife? I don't know what kind of wives you have, or if you even have one, but or have you ever done something that you just really didn't want to do, but by darn, you did it. You maybe watched a show you didn't want to watch. You went to a movie that somebody else picked out. You went to another activity when you had better things to do. You endured the activity. You endure of all things. And the pride side of that virtue is impatience. I will confess right now that that's one that I have the most trouble with. I find myself, here I am giving clever excuses, like I said up above, I guess a little bit, and maybe not even a little bit, maybe I'm just guilty of it, but I need to own it. And I come to the conclusion I need to own the fact that I'm not a patient person. My wife has vision problems. She has macular degeneration in her eyes. The middle of her vision is starting to get more blurry. There's no corrective measure that we're aware of. Even though we take some vitamins to try to improve it, she gets some shots to try to delay it. It just keeps getting worse. And her hearing is going bad. And between those two things, you wouldn't think that would present a problem, but it kind of does. To somebody that's as impatient as me, and shame on me. I should realize the difficulties, but sometimes she'll hear one thing, or I'll say one thing and she'll hear another, or she'll thought I did one thing and she acts like I said something else, or she can't quite see something that I see, or whatever. I'm not trying to hide myself behind clever excuses, like it says up here, not puffed up. Or not puffed up, but thinketh no evil. Assumes evil intent where there is none, and hides his own weakness under their clever excuses. That's kind of what I just did, isn't it? So I'm guilty there too. But this is my point. This list and an awareness of what the opposite for this is can end up being the steering wheel for your life. I don't know if any of you have driven a machine where you have levers on each side here, left and right hand levers, and how you control those levers controls the machine. I'm starting to see it that way. This charity lever and the pride lever, and if I'm not aware of both of them at the same time, I'm not going to steer correctly. And so there's a need for an understanding of opposition to every one of these virtues that are absolutely going to make us joyous. But Satan's coming after us. The last thing he wants is for us to be joyous. It says in the scriptures, he wants us to be miserable like he is. And he's coming after us. That's why when you have a choice to be kind or unkind, envious or not envious, and the list goes on. When we have those choices, there's a fork in the road, like I've said, and we become called upon at that point to hearken to the voice of the Spirit. Here's the sign again. You've seen it now for about 3 sessions in a row. We become called upon to hearken, to hear it and do it. And if we don't, by default, we choose the pride portion of what I've just talked about from Elder Uchtdorf's talk. If we don't hear him, or when we hear him, we ignore him, we've chosen by default the pride side of that. I had a thought today as I was thinking about this. I was thinking of some way to demonstrate. Let me see if I can just talk you through it visually. You ever seen these little beads that you can put on top of a rod and they slide down the rod? What if, as we went through the day, we received these promptings and we became more and more aware of them, more and more aware of the Spirit, like President Nelson has asked us to do, to become better at being aware, to identify it. If we had some beads, every time we heeded the charity portion, we put a bead on that rod. And when we heard it and we didn't do it, we put a bead on the other rod by default. That's what I mean by default. So all these little prompts we get as we go through the day. I should be real quiet or I'm going to wake my wife up. Okay, put a bead on the charity rod. Or, it's time for her to get up anyway. I'll be noisy as I want to be. I'll put a bead on the pride rod. Okay? And it's the same all the way down through. If I become easily provoked, somebody says something that just sets me off. Well, I don't classify as being not easily provoked, so I can't put it on the charity rod. I have to put that bead on the pride rod. And as I go through the day, I'm putting beads on either the charity rod or the pride rod. And at the end of the day, when I look at that, or the Lord looks at it as we're going through the day. But if we want a summary of that, just look at those rods and say, well, let's see, how did I stack up today? How did I make it through the day? I got lots of beads on the charity rod. Did I hear the Spirit? Hear him? And heed him? Hearken to the word that I said? Did I hear it and do it? Or did I hear it and ignore it? Put a bead on the pride rod instead. Our lives, as we go through every single hour of the day, and I should break it down minute by minute because sometimes it comes that way. We have to make these choices. We hear things, we get promptings. Sometimes it's a prompting not to do something. Sometimes it's a prompting to do something. Little things, start to recognize the voice behind those and start to become aware of whether you're heeding that voice or whether you're not, whether you're putting a bead on the charity rod or the pride rod in opposition to the charity rod. I hope I'm making my point, and I hope you remember the little bell that just keeps showing up in these, because every time you hear that, what that bell says is you've received a prompt. What are you going to do about the prompt? Are you going to do like the horse did in the Arabian horse obedience training allegory that shows up on YouTube when you search it, about 5 minutes long? When that horse hears, what does that horse do? Or does that horse make clever excuses? And tries to find evil intent or hides their own weaknesses under clever excuses, like it says here in President Uchtdorf's talk. Well, I hope I've given you some food for thought, even with repetition. I hope it's starting to sink. I hope that you're starting to realize that in doing all this, we're putting the roof on our building that we're going to make. You might think it's made when it's just standing there, but it's not made without a roof or a foundation. And even if we have the foundation, we've got to have the roof before we can make things really pretty and nice inside and enjoy it. Or the rain will come through and ruin the paint, and we'll never get anywhere. Well, I want you to get somewhere. I want me to get somewhere. I want to overcome some of these problems that I've got, particularly the one with patience. And you can tell I have a tendency to make clever excuses too. So I must be influenced by the wrong source. I must let Satan enter into my thoughts more than I should in ways that I might not understand, just because they're not jaw-dropping like they used to be, or like I see sometimes other people doing or on TV. It should be jaw-dropping to me because I'm trying to improve. Like Nephi said, "Oh, wretched man that I am," and yet we already read what a great person he was. But he said he thought of himself as a wretched man because he was trying to improve and he was struggling. Well, I don't mean for life. Life is not intended to be a constant bad feeling. We shouldn't go through life thinking, "Oh, wretched person." But there might be times when we should. And then the best way to take care of that is form a relationship with the Lord. Tell him you're sorry. You'll try to do better. You'll try to improve. And as I'm sitting here and I say those words, I again recall the words of my father when I was married. And he brought us back into the kitchen before we were headed off to Provo to school, my wife and I. He brought me back into the kitchen. He said, "I've got something I want to tell you." And he didn't say much, but I can see it like it happened yesterday almost. It's been a long, long time ago, 55 years. He said, "Just remember, I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. And when you do not what I say, ye have no promise." That's scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm bound when you do what I say. Well, the Lord's already paid the price, and I need to tap into that offering, that sacrifice, and do the things that He tells me to do. I need to focus. I need to hone my skills at hearing His voice amongst all the others and discerning what it is and heeding it. And if I do, I'll receive His peace that He promised the disciples before He went to Gethsemane. His peace that He would give unto them. I want that same kind of peace, and I want it for you as well. In the worst way, I can't explain to you how deep of a desire I have for you to feel that peace and that joy as you go through life. And I know opposition and the overcoming of opposition, choosing charity over pride, is the way to do that. Focus on 12 virtues. I love you. I really do. You know that, don't you? I hope so. Good night.